Is Gregg Popovich and the San Antonio Spurs franchise holding Victor Wembanyama back? The short answer is yes. And no. It's very, very complicated, and I'd like to break it down for you guys in the best way I can in this video. Hopefully you guys enjoy. With a lot of, recent things I've seen on Twitter and YouTube about Victor Wembanyama and, his minute situation, and the Spurs only having 8 or 9 wins at this point at the time of me recording this video, being one of the bottom tier teams in the league, while having one of the greatest rookie seasons from Victor Wembanyama that we've ever seen in the NBA. Side note, just as an NBA fan, it's awesome to see Victor being everything and more that we thought he could be, despite some of the Gregg Popovich and San Antonio Spurs allegations of, resting him on purpose to maybe lose some games. We're going to talk about all that. So as far as Gregg Popovich holding Victor Wembanyama back, I do think if you watch the games and just look at the stat sheet, there's clear evidence to say that Victor's full potential has not been unleashed upon the NBA world just yet. Now you might be asking yourself, why would they not just cut him loose and let him do what he does? The goal is to win games, right? Wrong. If you were a team like the San Antonio Spurs and your supporting cast around your future superstar is not where you want it to be or not even close, you have some core pieces there, guys like Devin Vassell, like Keldon Johnson, like Jeremy Sohan, those are all really, really good pieces. Trey Jones as well. But if you look around the NBA recently, you might be able to tell that is not quite enough to make any kind of noise in a postseason run. So there's some clear and obvious tanking going on by the Spurs. That's the reason Victor isn't getting as many minutes as maybe he should or could, and that's why the Spurs only have 8 or 9 wins. They're purposely losing to get better odds in the draft lottery. So if you take all that into account, I think most people would agree with that. Then the conversation and questions become, should they be doing that? Is that good for Victor Wembanyama's future potential? Is that good for a culture? Is that something they should be doing in his early career? Maybe a chance of him losing confidence, building a losing culture, things like that. There's all kinds of problems that arise from a situation like this. I'm going to give you my thoughts on them. So I will say there are pros and cons. This is, again, we're going to have to see how this situation unfolds, and we probably won't know until years down the line just how much of an effect this will have on Victor Wembanyama's future as an NBA player, whether that be positive or negative. But I will say I do believe it is absolutely something that makes a lot of sense from the Spurs' shoes. Victor right now is a player that can impact winning at a high level. I think we can all agree with that. There is so much more work to be done, obviously, and I believe that he has the capabilities and staff and organization around him to be able to do those things. But when you really think about it, with the Spurs roster right now, what is the best outcome if they full send Wemby's minutes and unleash him to the NBA with that supporting cast? Like, in my opinion, I see like maybe a fringe play-in team, and in that case, you lose out on the lottery entirely, and you're just setting yourself back as a franchise to, kind of mediocrity at this point, unless there's a big free agent signing. But with the tanking situation, it gives you opportunities in the draft to put players around Wemby, like if you look back at the Spurs dynasty, Tim Duncan, his star teammates weren't necessarily lottery picks, right? They got Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili late in those drafts, right? But the idea is they're playing the odds, the odds that they're able to scoop up a great second option in the draft with a top 5 pick is way better than just rolling the dice and full sending the team right now and hoping that they can get someone in free agency or a trade or some kind of thing close to that, right? So I think the strategy is sound. I just believe it's a matter of how they implement it, and we'll have to see what that looks like. Because honestly, this season will be all for nothing almost if the player that they draft with their high pick isn't a serviceable number 2 or number 3 option on a winning level in the future. So who they draft with this pick is going to determine a lot of things in that organization moving forward. But I will say there's no one almost better to do this that I would trust more than Gregg Popovich. Whenever there's tanking involved in a situation with a young star, you see it in Detroit, you see it with my, process 76ers era, there's a very good chance that you basically set a precedent for a losing culture, right? And losing is acceptable. And then all of a sudden you flip the switch, hey, we're trying to win now. That's just not really something you can turn on and off with a young player, I believe. And it can really manifest into a lot of growing pains and learning how to be a winning player, learning what that takes, It's not just something you can switch on and off with a young player, like I said, someone who's supposed to be carrying a franchise on their back. But like I said, Victor Wembanyama seems like a great kid. He seems like a worker. Everything I see would lead me to believe that he will be just fine in this situation. Coach Popovich, who better to, lead this charge of developing this all-time generational talent and developing a winning team around him as he progresses further into his career. So basically, to cut it short, I believe what they're doing is the right thing to do this year, but it's going to depend on whether or not the results are good of the draft pick, of just how much better they're able to get through this whole thing. Will it be another year like this next year? Will it be a 4-year rebuild? These are very important questions to ask. Like I said, the results are going to determine whether or not this strategy is a success or not. That's kind of how rebuilds work, and it looks a lot worse when you're tanking as opposed to just organically rebuilding, because what they're doing in San Antonio is not organic by any means. It's not like they're just throwing players out there that aren't good enough to win games right now to score lottery picks later. That's an organic rebuild. Tanking is very different. They are manipulating their roster and rotations to service their losing record so that they have a better chance at the lottery of getting the first overall pick or whatever. So in my opinion, if you're going to do that type of thing, it better work, or else you've established a losing culture and you've wasted several years of this generational talent's career. One thing I do want to address, though, is just the takes that I've seen around the internet about this kind of situation. Like, I just don't think people really understand what the goal is, or they just think, Popovich is just incompetent. He doesn't play Wemby minutes because he's just a bad coach, or they're running the team poorly, or they're, throwing point guards out there that can't play point guard, right? Just because they think, they're not good talent evaluators. Right? Not only do I believe that take to be wrong, I believe it to be just about as wrong as you can get. There's no scenario, no world where the greatest talent evaluating franchise and the greatest talent evaluator in NBA history, Gregg Popovich, just all of a sudden can't coach, can't evaluate, doesn't know what he's doing, right? Like, that's just not really a sound argument if you look back historically, right? So we're basically talking about an organization and coach and, culture that has developed several mid to late second round picks into being Hall of Famers, stars, quality NBA serviceable players, because they just develop talent at a higher rate than a lot of these other teams. So again, I trust that the Spurs will handle this the best they can. And if I was going to pick an organization to do it, it 100% would be the Spurs, right? Their track record is impeccable when discussing things like talent evaluation and player development, right? So I know this is kind of long-winded and I apologize, but I just wanted to get that out of the way because I feel it's an important thing to note about this whole situation. A lot of people see this as hindering progress. I see this as positioning yourself as an organization to further a player's progress, to ensure that you do everything you can to put the right pieces around the biggest piece, right? So that's basically how I see the situation. That's what I think is happening. And a lot of people want Wemby to play 35 minutes a game, but like, every loss matters. Like, we say every win matters for, contenders. It's the opposite for tanking, right? I talked about this in my Pistons video just the other day. You don't want to be in the middle of the pack in the NBA. That's the worst place you can be. They call it NBA purgatory. You want to be one of the bottom teams or one of the top teams. If you're one of the top teams, that means you already have superstar talent that can carry you to a championship. If you're one of the bottom teams, that means that you are actively pursuing those type of players so that in 5 years or so, you can be one of the top teams. It's a very simple concept, but do people honestly want the Spurs to win 4 extra games by playing Wemby 5 extra minutes or so a game? Like, those 5 games could put you out of the top 4 lottery percentages. I believe it's 14%. If you're a top 4 team, you have a 14% chance of getting the first overall pick. So if you mess around and play Wemby too many minutes any given night, you could knock yourself out of the top 5 draft picks. I mean, then what's this all for, So this is something you really got to commit to. It's kind of all or nothing when you're tanking. That's kind of the whole point of it, right? When you're in the draft lottery, 14% it's not a guarantee, right? But it's the biggest percent you can get nowadays. Used to be 25%, I believe, for the top team, or the bottom team, I should say. But there is a huge difference from a 14% chance and a 9% chance or a 7% chance. It could be the difference in your franchise moving forward. Like, imagine you have the second overall pick and you win 2 extra games by playing your best player too many minutes, and you end up at 7. You end up with the 7th pick, right? That could be the difference between another generational talent and a role player or a bust, right? Like, these are ideas that the Spurs are considering when making the decisions they're making. Like, would you sacrifice a season to get a Wembanyama or a LeBron James or a generational talent? Of course you would, especially if you don't have championship expectations anyway. So that's kind of what I see this as. The only mistake I hope the Spurs don't make is not communicating with Wembanyama and these other core pieces about this type of situation. Like, I don't know what goes on in the locker room. I don't know what goes on in these meetings. Like, do they tell Wemby, like, hey, you know, this is what we're doing, we're tanking, or, you know, maybe we'll decrease your minutes a little bit, we want you to play this way, just so you can kind of get the, you know, foundation for your game in the NBA, see what it looks like, see what your weaknesses are, and then we can tackle those in the offseason. But in the meantime, we're trying to get you another superstar, and this is how we're going to try to do it. Put your faith in us to be able to achieve this. We have 5 rings, blah, blah, blah. If they're approaching Wemby like that, I think that's a W, right? I know for my Sixers during the process, there was barely any communication between these players, right? Like they would just walk on the floor and not know who was in the lineup that day, not know what was going on. And it created a culture of, you know, uncertainty and resentment and all this bad stuff. You know, it's a losing culture. You're expected to lose. We're trying to lose, but we're not going to talk to you guys about it, even though you're the ones we're building around, right? Like, that's an L. One of the biggest crucial mistakes I hope the Spurs don't make with a rebuild is, and having experienced this with my process Sixers, is jumping the gun on when to flip that switch, right? Like, you know, these 3 years we're going to be building through the draft. We're going to be acquiring assets to, you know, help Wemby and propel his career forward in the future, right? Like when he's in his prime, so to speak, right? But in the case of the 76ers, they made that transition almost overnight in like the 2018-2019 season, and they expected these players who have been, you know, losing because of no, you know, chemistry and teammates around them and things always up in the air and changing, to go out there and win a championship, right? These guys are young. Not all of them have played together that much. They don't know what it means to win. They don't know what it takes to win, but all of a sudden overnight they're expected to be contenders. And then when they fail, they're disappointments. Like, that's a very, very tough position to put a player in so early in their career, especially when they, you know, haven't been, you know, coached and prepared the right way to do so. So how you handle this type of thing is very, very important. You know, if this is a gradual thing that slowly builds and you acquire this piece, you acquire that piece year in and year out, you do all the right things, you work with the players, you kind of gently guide them along to where they need to be, that fits your timeline of a rebuild or whatever, that's how it's supposed to work. Don't make the mistake of selling all your assets in one off season and saying, okay guys, you know, I know the last 3 years and your first 3 years of your career, we were doing this thing, whatever. Hey, now Jimmy Butler's here. Time to go get it. Time to go win a championship. And if you don't, who knows what'll happen? Maybe you'll be off the team. Maybe you'll get traded. Maybe he'll get traded. Who knows? Right? Like, that is a very, very unreasonable and unproductive way to go about things in a situation like this. And it's only setting yourself up for a future rebuild, because then assets leave. Maybe your best player doesn't like the situation. Maybe the culture is toxic, whatever. It's just a whole mess of issues. So my point is, basically, this kind of thing can actually be the best way to get to where you want to be. But there is a very thin line between handling it the right way and having a future disaster on your hands where you lose everything, including Wemby, in the process. That's pretty much it for the video. Make sure you guys drop a like. Let me know what you think down in the comment section of this situation. Does what I said make sense? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'm always up for a discussion. Genuinely, I love having discussions about this type of stuff in the comments. Love to hear other people's perspective. Maybe if you're a Spurs fan, then let me know what you think down in the comments. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing in this whole big picture, or maybe you just disagree. You know, that's okay. We can all disagree. It's just basketball, man. Only thing I ask is that you don't be disrespectful about it. That's just not productive, and I just won't tolerate that. So like I said, drop a like, subscribe, let me know down in the comment section what you think. Hopefully you guys have a fantastic rest of your day today. Good luck to Wemby and the Spurs. This is your boy D-Have, and as always, peace.